So the words of Torah that we say should be Refuah Shlema Yudit Yeta Bat Elka. I don't remember exactly where we left off. I think we were discussing the halachot of women's responsibility to daven, and I think we more or less finished that off. So now we're up to halachot of nitilat yadayim when it comes for the su'udah. When it comes to washing hands, when you're about to eat bread, women are responsible just like men. He doesn't actually discuss it, but where's this concept of washing your hands before you eat bread come from? If this was not a religious crowd, I don't know if I would say it. Because when people hear it, they're like, that's the reason? I'm not doing that. Right? Does anybody know where it comes from?
You're curious now?
Now you're curious. The Kohanim, before they would eat tirumah, they would wash their hands. So to remember that the Kohanim, it's a small percentage of people, right? Before the Kohanim ate their tirumah, in the Beit HaMikdash, which is a short amount of time, like when you think about Jewish history, the Kohanim would wash their hands to eat tirumah. Therefore, we wash our hands to remember that the Kohanim used to wash their hands. There's obviously deeper Kabbalistic and things that are relevant to us as well, but that's where the concept comes from, if I'm not mistaken. It says women are obligated just as much as men, and it's important that we teach our kids, even from a young age, to do netilat yadayim. He says, when you do netilat yadayim, what is the measurements? So he says, if somebody's going to eat bread, right, if she has in mind to eat a shiur kizayit. I was must have been 4 or 5 years ago, I was in New York in Borough Park. There's something called the Living Jewish Museum, I think, or the Jewish Living Museum. It's like a house in Borough Park. You wouldn't even know that, like, it's not a regular, just big house in Borough Park. The guy who runs it, he was there. So you have to go when he's there. It's fascinating. He went on to tell us, I asked him if he would come to London. He said, for the right price. But half the enjoyable thing is all the stuff he has. Basically, he's like an archaeologist and a historian. And he had over there, when they excavated King Tut's tomb, nothing to do with Judaism, the guy who excavated it was told, anything there's two of, you can keep. So the guy that was there, and it was on Pesach, and he was talking about different things, Yetziat Mitzrayim. He said, anybody here's named Moshe? I raised my hand. He's like, come here. He takes out his sword. He said, they found this sword. It's actually this week's parasha. He says, when Parot, the Midrash says, tries to kill Moshe Rabbeinu, right? And he like picks me up, puts my head back, puts the sword to my neck. It's like, this was the sword. Right? He says, anybody want to wear a $165,000 ring? And this little kid's like, ooh, me. And he takes out one of King Tut's rings, right? And there was a fish. I have a picture of my son, a 3,200-year-old fish that was mummified. I didn't realize they mummified fish, but I guess when they woke up, or when they expected to wake up, they were going to be hungry. Why am I telling you this? Because he said over there, he showed us there was like little makeup containers, which was interesting, and they used to do their eyelashes. And then he said, we found over there the seeds of different things. He said, this is the seed of a zayit. Now, we know that there's certain shiurim that are called kizayit or kabetza. A zayit is an olive, a kabetza is an egg. And the Gemara discusses, when we have a misorah, we have a tradition that it should be like an olive. Who says our fruit is the same size as their fruit? Maybe their kabetza or their kazayit is actually much bigger or much smaller, right? And he was saying that they took some of these seeds, planted them, and they bore fruit, even though they were in this cave for 1,000, or this tomb. And he was showing the size. He says the kazayit isn't that much bigger or smaller than we have nowadays. Right? So when he discusses over here, you're going to do netilat yadayim. It's for a kizayit, which he says is 27 grams. You need to, if you know you're going to eat less than 27 grams, you still do netilat yadayim, but you don't make a bracha. If you know you're going to eat more than a kabetza, which is 54 grams, which is like nothing, right? Then you wash and you make a bracha. He doesn't discuss it. There's also a concept, if you didn't plan on eating a certain amount of cake or donuts, and before you knew it, suddenly you were like, oh my gosh. Right? You're like Bet Shammai. Every day of Hanukkah you had another one, and then another one, and then another one, Bet Hillel, I should say, another one. Right? Before you know it, you had 8 if you just had like a cake eating contest. I don't know if ladies do that. But then you would do netilat yadayim, even though it's cake. There's a certain amount of cake that if you know, and even if you didn't wash because you didn't plan, but before you knew it, you would still say Birkat HaMazon if you ended up having loads and loads of donuts, but not our discussion for now. So he says, you would netilat yadayim, less than 27 grams, you still wash, but you don't make a bracha. 54 grams, he says, you wash with a bracha. In general, he says it's better to make sure that you wash with the bracha, have in mind to eat 54 grams, which again is a very small amount. And it's important to teach our kids, you're going to eat bread, you should wash. The concept, you see it a lot in England, you don't see it very much in Israel or America, of mizonot, bread. Right? Where does that concept come from? I'm convinced it started that like on the airplanes to get up and to go and move, it was a huge hassle. So what makes bread mizonot? Right, when they add in a certain amount of either grape juice or apple juice, you rarely see that in America or Israel. Like all the bread is hamotzi. Over here we almost take for granted the bread is most likely mizonot. In America, elsewhere it's not like that very much. He brings down over here, interesting, we have this on Pesach. Right? We know Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas. When it comes to Karpas, what do? You wash your hands and you make a beracha, even though you're not eating bread. Why? Because there's a concept of davar shitibulon b'mayim. If you're going to eat something that's wet, you're supposed to do netilat yadayim. Now, most of the fruits or vegetables that we eat that would be wet, we're using a fork. If you're not actually touching it with your hand, then you don't need to do netilat yadayim. But in theory, if you wash some grapes or an apple and you didn't dry them, and it's going to be wet, or you're just, you're eating lettuce straight out of the bag, and you washed it, and you're not eating it with a fork, technically you would have to do netilat yadayim when you're eating those fruits and vegetables that are tibula b'mayim. That's what he says. He says, and he even says, what if you're dipping your cake into your coffee, or into your tea, or cookies and milk? You're dipping, right? That also, you should really be washing. I'll read it to you. In Hebrew, dinan bezeh kedin hanashim, v'hainu shochev davar sheyesh alav netivot mayim, if there's going to be the condensation or it's wet, right? What happens? Or you're going to dip it, he says, in any mashke, even if you're dipping it in oil. You have bread, you're dipping in oil. Bread, obviously, you'd be washing, or certain things, or shemen zayit, chalav, tal, even just some dew, whatever it is, you want it to be wet. Yesh b'zeh netivut shu tafeach hamanat atfiach. It's a concept of, what enough. What happens? You don't make a bracha. You do netilat yadayim, but you do not make a bracha. And you wash the way you would wash for bread in general. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. If I'm not mistaken, you do it different. In the morning you do 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and when you're eating bread you do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. In the morning they just want you to make sure you're up and you're not just right. So you're a little bit more up if you're alternating hands and switching 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. But for netilat yadayim, when you're eating bread, or over here tofeach hamanat atfiach, without the bracha, you would wash it 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Says en tzarich litol hayadayim kol she'eno tofeach hamanat atfiach v'chen hamatpelet prosat uga pachot mikazayit, because te'el kafeh, if you're going to dip it into your tea or into your milk and it's less than a kazayit, you do not need to do netilat yadayim, even though you're using your hands. And he says the same thing. If obviously we said if you're using a fork and you're not actually touching it, it's not a problem. You wouldn't have to do netilat yadayim. Someone's having a salad, you go to the shop. But if you are going to be using your hand and it's wet, then you should be doing netilat yadayim without a bracha. When someone does netilat yadayim, they should make sure that their hands are clean. Make sure their hands are clean. It says if a woman has a manicure, right? The whether it's gel or whether it's, I don't know the different types of manicures, but in general just regular nail polish, that's not considered a chatzitza when it comes to netilat yadayim. When it comes to going to the mikveh, we know that's considered a separation, a chatzitza. When it comes to netilat yadayim, it's not a problem. I remember when I was in Kolel, I got my smicha in halachot of family purity of nida, and we were discussing chatzitza, and I said, when it comes to a man, if a man's hands are dirty and they do netilat yadayim, that's a problem. It's considered a chatzitza, unless the person is an artist or a mechanic, where their hands are usually dirty anyways, and they're okay with that, then that's not considered chatzitza. But on Shabbat, where even if you're a mechanic or an artist, but for Shabbat, you usually, if you're going to a wedding, you'll make sure that you clean your hands. That would be considered chatzitza, right? Because it's not normal that a man would have a manicure. And this guy from LA, this was like 15 years ago, he goes, in LA, most guys get manicures with clear polish. I'm like, seriously? He's like, yep. I'm like, that's the norm? He said, that's the norm. I'm like, then that's not clear. Right? Then I said, then it's not considered, if it's normal, then it's not considered a chatzitza. Right? But for women, it's not considered a chatzitza. If you have nail polish, you want it to be there, you're making sure it looks good. When it comes to rings, right? Do you need to take off your rings if you're doing netilat yadayim? Yes or
Take it
no?
off
What do you
when
say?
do halal, then yes.
Yes, he says if you normally take it off. I heard a story one time. This girl, Balat Shuva, had never gone to a Shabbat meal, and she goes with all these young ladies, and they do kiddush, sing Shalom Aleichem, Eshet Chal. It's very nice, and they all go to wash their hands, and she's queuing up. She's waiting on the line to wash her hands, and she's getting more and more nervous. And her friend that brought her said, "What's wrong?" And she's like, "All the girls, they take off their rings, they do netilat yadayim, and then what do they do with their rings quite often? They put it in their mouth. They put it in their mouth." She's like, "What's the problem?" She's like, "I don't have any rings to put in my mouth." She thought that was part of the minhag, that when you do netilat yadayim, you take off your rings, put them in your mouth, and then you do netilat yadayim. Right? I've never noticed or paid attention until I heard that story, that's you put it in your mouth. But okay, right? If it's the type of thing, as you lady said, that you would normally take off your rings when you're making challah, you don't want the dough getting all into your rings, then you should take off your rings, you do netilat yadayim. If it's the type of ring that you don't care, it just stays on, doesn't matter, dough, no dough, whatever it is, then you would not have to take off your rings to do netilat yadayim. It's not considered a chatzitza. If you put on some cream, right, your hands are chapped or whatever it is, you put on some cream, that's not, and then you do netilat yadayim, that's not considered a chatzitza as well. That's the halachot of netilat yadayim. Next week we can discuss Bezat Hashem the halachot of Su'udah by Birkat HaMazon. So this week we start a new book, the book of Shemot. Right? Now there's, in these parashiyot, there's just so much to discuss, but I thought we would discuss a little bit about Moshe Rabbeinu. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu is arguably the greatest man who ever lived, the greatest person who ever lived. When I went to Israel last week for 2 days, and the kollel that I was in, Rabbi Yitzchak Berkowitz is called the Jerusalem kollel. They did like an alumni thing for husbands and wives. I just tagged along on the last day because, anyways, I wanted to go pray for my mother, and they were going to Kever Rachel and Marat HaMachpelah. To go to Marat HaMachpelah, or to go to Hebron in general, most people usually get a bulletproof bus. So I said, I will tag along. And when we were in Hebron, we also went to the kever of Yishai and Ruth. Okay? Ruth, great-grandmother of David HaMelech and Yishai. And I said to somebody, I said, it's quite interesting, because the Gemara in Megillah says there's four men who never sinned in their life, didn't even have one avera. Who are those four men? Anybody know? So the Gemara says Binyamin, right? The son of Yaakov Avinu, the tribe. Binyamin never did an avera, not once in his life. The Gemara says Amram, in this week's parasha, the father of Moshe Rabbeinu, never sinned once in his life.
Sorry to disturb, but someone's blocking one of the neighbours.
Yes, it's Meto that she's coming here.
No, she's not. She needs to leave her house.
Okay,
I'm
okay,
sorry.
no problem.
Sorry. She said afterwards you can block her again. She just needs to leave.
No.
Sorry.
No problem.
Thank you.
So Amram, in this week's parasha, the father of Moshe Rabbeinu, he never had one avera in his life. Yishai, the father of David HaMelech, and the Gemara says Kalev. Some say it's Kalev ben Yefuneh. Some say it's the son of David HaMelech. Kalev. These four men never sinned in their life. Right? I have ADD, so I'll just skip. Amram. It's quite interesting. Amram. I was reading a Dvar Torah in the airport as I was waiting, and there's a famous idea when it comes to Miriam. Right? Amram divorces Yocheved. Why does Amram divorce Yocheved? Because he says, what's the point of having kids if they're just going to throw them in the ocean? Right? Paro sees in the constellations, in the mazalot, that the leader of the Jewish people is about to be born, the Redeemer of the Jews is going to be born, and his downfall is through the water. Where was his downfall through the water? Moshe Rabbeinu, his downfall was through the water when it hits the rock. Right? Now, Paro doesn't know what that means, so we're throwing all the babies into the water. Amram, the Gadol Hador, the chief rabbi, if you will, he sees what's happening. He says, what's the point of having kids? He divorces his wife. And what happened afterwards? Everybody divorces their wife. Miriam, little 5-year-old Miriam, comes and says, Dad, you're worse than Paro. How could you say such a thing? He's literally killing innocent babies. You're killing all the boys. Paro's killing the boys. You're also killing the girls. Amram says, you know what? You're right. And he remarries his wife, and then everybody remarries. Now, I won't get into the specifics. It's another discussion for another time. But the rabbi was pointing out, look at the emunat chachamim. Imagine I tell you, Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, I'm doing this. I would say, Hazaku Baruch, he's the Gadol Hador, on his level, that's great. What's that do with me? You know what I mean? the chief rabbi does it, every single guy, I would hope and assume they love their wives. Every single guy says, all right, if that's what we're doing, that's what we're doing. Like the unbelievable, just the rabbi says so, no problem. Right? The Rabbi Galinsky, he was discussing this idea. He brought down a Gemara that this guest rabbi came to town, and he got up and he was talking about the water you're supposed to use for Pesach when you're making the matzah. He says everybody should use mayim shelanu. Right? Mayim shelanu means the water that we drew out of the well, that we know has been drawn out of the well and has been washed. Right? That morning, everybody queues up in front of this guest rabbi's house. And they're waiting outside with buckets. He says, what are you doing here? He's like, you said we have to use your water, so we came to get your water. He's like, no, I didn't mean mayim shelanu, meaning it had to be mine. I meant that each person has to. Right? My son, the first time we were very excited. My wife kept telling him, we're going to go to Miami, and we're going to go to the pool, and we're going to go to Miami. And he was like, I'm so excited to go to Miami. I'm like, what? He's like, we're like, no. Miami. He's like, exactly. Yorami. That's the name of the place. Right? That's how these people understood it. The rabbi said, Mayim Shelanu. It has to be my... And Rabbi Galinsky pointed out, all these people in town, of the story of this Gemara, their whole lives they've been using water. And now this rabbi comes and says, you need to use my water, according to their misunderstanding. That's it. The rabbi said so. Everybody in town is now queuing up with their buckets to get water. Like the emunat chachamim was unbelievable. But when I was at the kever of Yishai and Ruth, I said, what do we know about Yishai, David HaMelech's father? Do we know much about him? Do we talk much about him? No. Amram. The guy doesn't have one sin in his whole life. What do we know about Amram? Not very much. Do we talk about him as one of the greatest people who ever lived? Not really. I would have thought, on their level, Moshe Rabbeinu sins, Abraham Avinu sins, David HaMelech sins, everybody. And the Gemara says, "Any sheshayechta," right? There's nobody. These four people never sin, and yet we basically know nothing about them. How could that be? And I said, I once heard a rabbi say, the greatest possible reward that you can give an Amram for never having one Avera is that his son is a Moshe Rabbeinu. His son is the greatest person ever lived. Yishai, not one sin. That's why his son is going to be David HaMelech. And we read his Tehillim, and we talk about David HaMelech. The greatest reward for any parent is that their son, their daughter, their child becomes the greatest person ever. That's what we want for our kids. That's all we want. That our kids should succeed. Halavai, they're 1 billion times better than us. If only. Hopefully, they succeed much more. I spoke in Barclays Bank on Hanukkah. And I was talking to one of the people that invited me to come speak. She knew me, she had heard me speak. And we were just talking about like her siblings, and I said, in my experience, usually nowadays, children rarely end up like their parents. They either go more to the right or more to the left. Very rarely do kids stay the same. I said, look at you. I had nothing to do with covering hair. I said, your mom covers her hair. You don't, right? She's like, yeah. I said, that people would say is a step down. I said, look at your brother. He's like a frummer in Kola, right? He won't go with your parents certain places on holiday because it's not frum enough, right? The kids don't stay the same. They either end up usually much more to the right or much more to the left. I don't want to use the word much frummer because that means different things to different people. We won't get into it, right? But the greatest reward for an Amram is that his son is Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu, we know, is born and he's hidden for a few months. He's born premature. He's hidden for a few months. And then the time comes and they can no longer hide him. They put him in the ocean. He gets saved by the daughter of Paro. I never understood, she wasn't pregnant. She comes home. She's like, ooh, I got a baby. Like, what? And they're like, cool. No question. I've never seen anyone discuss it. What just happened over there? Maybe, again, the women had their own houses and the men had their own houses and her father never really saw her and then she just showed up with the kid. I don't know if she was married. I don't know. I don't know the logistics. Don't ask. Has anyone ever discussed it, thought about it? No? I don't know how she just came home with the kid and nobody had any questions, but if they didn't ask, I'm not going to ask. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu grows up in the palace of Paro. And then Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayigdal Hanar, he grows up, he goes out, he sees there's two Jews. A Jew being beaten by an Egyptian, he saves the Jew. The next day he comes out, he sees that there's two Jews fighting. Rasha, lama taker echa, why are you going to hit your friend? And he ends up having to run away. How old is Moshe Rabbeinu at this stage? when Moshe Rabbeinu runs away from the palace. How old is Moshe Rabbeinu? It says Vayigdal Hanar. He becomes a gadol. Some say he became bar mitzvah. Some say he's 20. Right? There's one element of becoming a gadol when you're 12 years old for a girl, 13 years old for a boy, and then 20 is special. What's special about 20? Now you're bar onshin. If you're 13, 14, 15, and you don't get the death penalty. 20, we say you're mature enough. Now you're liable to get the death penalty. In Hebrew, they call it tipesh esrei. Right? From 11, you're tipesh esrei. We see from the Torah, you're not liable. 20, you're liable. So some say Moshe Rabbeinu, when the pasuk says Vayigdal Hanar, means that he is 20. Some say he was 13. Moshe Rabbeinu comes back on the scene, and he comes to Paro at the end of this week's parasha. How old is Moshe Rabbeinu at this stage? How old is Moshe Rabbeinu when he speaks to Paro? When he does all the plagues, when all the miracles happen? How old is Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe Rabbeinu is 80 years old. Right? The pasuk in next week's parasha even says straight out, Moshe is 80, Aaron's 83, and we know the Jews, they leave Mitzrayim, they're in the desert 40 years, Moshe Rabbeinu dies 120. So Moshe Rabbeinu is 80 years old. The question is, where was Moshe Rabbeinu for like 60 or 67 years? The Torah doesn't tell us. The Torah tells us, right? Moshe Rabbeinu is in the palace. Pretty amazing that Miriam, only Jews can pull off, that his mother's nursing him and she's getting paid to do it, right? That's a Jew right there. The pasuk says, Aliyah Shalishi, Vahi Bayamim Ahem, it was those days, Vayigdal Moshe grows up, Vayetzeh Lechav, he goes out to his brothers, Vayar B'sivlotam, he sees their affliction, Vayar Ish Mitzrim Akeish Ivri, he sees an Egyptian beating a Jew. The Midrash tells us, what's the story? Who's this person that the Egyptian's beating? Anybody know? Who's the person? So the Midrash tells us that you have a woman called Shelomit Bat Divri. Who is Shelomit Bat Divri? Right? We see about her at the end of, or in the book of Bamidbar, if I'm not mistaken. Her son is the Mikalel. What's the story? She was Shelomit, right? She was always saying shalom to everybody. Bat Divri, the daughter of someone who talks a lot. She was very, very, very outgoing, very talkative. Maybe we even call her flirtatious, right? And it seems that she would schmooze with these Egyptian taskmasters. One time, her husband is either Datam va'aviram, and her brother is the other one. I don't remember which, I'm sorry. Right? Datam va'aviram. What happens? Her husband comes home from work. He's about to walk in the door. The Egyptian taskmaster says, back to work. What do you mean back to work? I already pulled my shift. Back to work. Sends him back to work. This Egyptian comes in. It's dark. It's at night. Shelomit Bat Ivri doesn't realize that this isn't her husband and that this is an Egyptian, and he ends up being with her. The next morning, her husband comes home, and they realize what happened over here. So now, her husband goes to this taskmaster, how dare you, chutzpah, how can you do such a thing, right? And the Egyptian taskmaster starts beating him. That's this story that Moshe Rabbeinu sees the Egyptian beating a Jew. What does he say? Vaifen ko. He turns left, he turns right. Rashi tells us he looks to see, are there any great people going to be born from this Egyptian? He looks into the future, sees this guy, no one important is going to be born for him, right? And what happens? It says Vaifen ko. Says Rashi, Ra'am ma'asalo babayit ma'asalo basadeh. He saw what happened in the field, and Vayar ke'en ish. He says Moshe Rabbeinu sees there's nobody around. Says Rashi, she'en ati latzit menu she'itgayer. Nobody important is going to be mitgayer, going to convert from this Egyptian. Right? The Gemara says, Bnei banav shel Haman lamdu Torah b'Bnei Brak. From Haman's descendants end up being people who learn Torah. We won't get into it. Haman's Amalek, are they allowed to convert? How many generations? Well, and again, it's a totally separate class, not our discussion for now. When they talk about free will, and they talk about, if I decide I don't like this person, I'm going to kill this person. I have free will to kill this person. Did Hashem want that to happen? Was it decided on Rosh Hashanah I should kill, that this person's going to die, or I use my free will? I know I'm confusing you. Right? One of the proofs they bring is that no, Hashem didn't decide on Rosh Hashanah that's supposed to happen. Is this Rashi? Moshe Rabbeinu looks, is anybody going to be born from this person? How could there possibly be that potential? if it was decided on Rosh Hashanah, this person is meant to be killed. Right? When Cain kills Hevel, Hashem comes to Cain and says, Dam achecha tzoakim alem min adama. The blood of your brother is calling out to me from the ground. Says Rashi, Dam achecha dam kol adorot. The blood of your brother and the blood of all future generations. How could there be a potential of future generations if Hashem knew that Cain's going to kill Hevel? Right? Now that I've confused you, we can leave it for another time. Right? Either way, I'm just throwing stuff out there. Moshe Rabbeinu sees nobody is meant to be important, to be mitgayer, to be born from this Egyptian, and he kills him. Right? He buries him in the sand. Right? And it comes the second day, Moshe Rabbeinu, two Jews, Nitzim, are there. There's two Jews fighting. Who are the two Jews? Datam and Aviram. Right? Datam saying, I can't go back to your sister. She was with this Egyptian that Moshe killed yesterday. He says, what do you mean? Ones. She was raped. She had no idea what was happening. Right? And they're having this whole disagreement. And they're about to come to physical blows. This also I never understood. Moshe Rabbeinu says, hey, Rasha, why are you fighting? Datam and Aviram look at Moshe Rabbeinu, they say, who put you in charge? He's the prince. He's in charge. Well, that was the question. Is that who made you in charge of us? You're going to kill us? Rabbi say, They prove that Moshe, even though it says Vayachet HaMitzri, he used his mouth, he used the Shema Meforash, he used Hashem's 72-letter name to kill the Egyptian, which shows that Moshe Rabbeinu already had some greatness in him and knew certain Kabbalah or Torah, whatever it is. Moshe was scared. Behold, the matter is known, and he runs away. Paro finds out about this, and he wants to kill Moshe, which again never made sense to me. They're killing Jews left, right, and center. They're a bunch of slaves. So Moshe, who's the prince, kills one of the Egyptians. Who cares? They're killing people. So he killed an Egyptian. Are you going to kill the prince if he killed one of the taskmasters? He runs to Midian. Now, the Midrash, I have a book in my house, highly recommended. It's called Let My People Go. Let My People Go. And in this book, Let My People Go, it brings down all the different Midrashim, organized very well. They also have Let My Nation Live. On Purim, they have Let My Nation Descend, all about Yosef and the brothers. Highly recommended. In there, it brings down the Midrash. Where was Moshe Rabbeinu before, when he left Egypt? Where did Moshe Rabbeinu go? So the Pasuk says he went to Midian. He made him a stop before he went to Midian for many years. Where was Moshe Rabbeinu before he went to Midian? Anybody? The Midrash says Moshe Rabbeinu went to Africa, went to Cush. In Hebrew, someone who's black is called a Cushi because they're coming from Africa. Cush is the name of Africa. What happens? The Midrash says Moshe Rabbeinu is running away from Paro. And he sees outside of Africa is the king of Africa with all the soldiers. They had gone to win a war. And when they came back, somebody had taken over, built this wall all around the entrances to Africa. And they took these scorpions and snakes, they put them by the entrances, and they built these drawbridges. And the king couldn't get back into his country. And they were stuck out there for many months. And the Midrash says, Moshe Rabbeinu sees them and says, what are you guys doing out here? I said, we can't get back into our own country. These guys came, they took over. And anytime we try and get close, we get killed by the snakes and scorpions. Moshe Rabbeinu thinks about it, says, I have a great idea. Why don't you get a bunch of vultures, starve them. Vultures, they can eat anything, even snakes and scorpions. The lining of their stomach is so thick, they can eat poison and they will eat, then you can get close, break down the drawbridge. They said, that's a great idea. And that's what they do. They listen to Moshe Rabbeinu, and they get back into Africa and reconquer their country. As a thank you, they invite Moshe Rabbeinu into the country. After a while, the king of Africa is sick. And they want Moshe Rabbeinu should become the next king of Africa. But to become the king, either you're born into royalty, or what do you need to do? You can marry him. So Moshe Rabbeinu marries the princess of Africa, and he ends up becoming the king of Africa for a bunch of years. Has anybody heard about this before? No. This is the Midrash. Where do we see this in the Torah? Where do we see this in the Torah? It says it straight out in the Torah. In Parashat Ba'alotecha, at the end of the parasha, when Miriam speaks Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu, what does the pasuk say? ותדבר מרים באהרון על משה. Miriam speaks to Aaron about Moshe. על אישה הכושית אשר לקח, about the Cushite woman that he takes. כי אישה כושית לקח, because he took a Cushite, he took a black woman. Now Rashi over there tells us, what's this referring to?
We were told it's Tzipora.
That's what Rashi says. That's Rashi. 1,000,000%. That's Rashi. Rashi says that's referring to Tzipora. Today's day and age, not so politically correct. She was so beautiful, she stuck out in a room of women the same way if you had a black jelly bean and the rest of them were all white. Right? Nowadays, Rashi wouldn't be so politically correct, but that's how beautiful Tzipora was. That's how much she stuck out in the room, how beautiful she was. It's referring to Tzipora. That's Rashi. What do the words simply say? Moshe Rabbeinu was with this Cushite woman. Now, because it sounds, I don't know. That's what the Midrash says. Now, the rabbis say he never actually consummated the marriage. He never had physical relations with her. But Hashem wanted him to learn leadership qualities, to be the king, because that way he'll learn how to lead people. I don't know if I told you before. The song V'hisha Amda, written by Yonatan Rozel, Yaakov Shwaki song, right? V'hisha Amda lavote. So Yonatan Rozel was in Kolel with me, and I mentioned my Rabbi Yitzhak Perkowitz. We're in Kolel together, right? That's when he wrote the song. I won't say after the recording. Remind me, right? Either way, one day my Chavruta wasn't there, and Yonatan's Chavruta wasn't there. So I said, Yonatan, yalla, let's learn. And the Gemara was talking about like agriculture, and he really knew what he was talking. I know nothing about agriculture and farming and that. I'm like, how do you know so much about agriculture? He's like, I lived in a kibbutz for 6 months. I'm like, were you the farmer? He's like, actually, I was a shepherd. I said, that's pretty cool. He's like, you know why the shepherd stands behind the flock? I'm like, yeah, so you can see where they're going. He says, no. If the shepherd stood in front and wanted the sheep to follow him, they'd specifically go in the opposite direction. So you have to play reverse psychology with the animals and make it like you're going this way, that way they go that way, and then once they're going, herd mentality, and you can follow them. And I thought to myself, that's why all the leaders of Judaism had to be shepherds. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu, David Amel, why do they have to be shepherds? Because you have to get used to playing reverse psychology with the people and expecting them to do the opposite of what you want them to do. But all right, I didn't see anyone say that. Moshe Rabbeinu, he has to become the king of Africa. Why? Hashem wants him to learn leadership qualities. Eventually, they want one of their own. He did his time. He then leaves and goes to Midian. When he gets to Midian, what happens in Midian? What story do we know about him in Midian? Oh, Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ulchohen Midian Sheva Banot, Yitro, who was the high priest. Right? The high priest. Imagine, I tell you, Moshe Rabbeinu, he went to the Pope's house. That's Kohen. The ultimate Kohen Midian. Sheva Banot, right? He has 7 daughters. There was a Shidduch crisis. Batavona, and they're by the well, and they're being bullied. Right? They're being bullied. Moshe stands up, he protects them, and Moshe helps them feed their flock. They come home and they say to Ruel, to Yitro, right? Yitro has 7 names. Ruel, Yeter, Yitro, Chova, Chever, Kenny, and Putiel. Right? Over here calls him Ruel. And they say, Ruel says, wow, you got home early. Yeah, this Egyptian guy, he helped us. Now, the rabbi said, Moshe is not Egyptian. Right? My father used to always say to me, you have to be a proud Jew. When it talks about Yosef, my father's name is Yosef. Right? When it talks about Yosef, it says, Ish Ivri. Calls him a Jewish guy, right? The head butler tells Paro, there's a Jewish guy in jail, he interprets dreams. Talks about Moshe, it says Ish Mitzri. He says, don't be Ish Mitzri, be a proud Jew. Okay, what does it mean? The Midrash says, no, because Moshe killed the Egyptian, therefore he had to run away. In the merit of the Egyptian, even though he was doing bad stuff, in his merit, Moshe had to run away, and that's why Moshe was there to help us and save us. Moshe Rabbeinu helps the girls. What does Yitro say? Hello? A little thank you? Invite the guy home? Please? Something? Right? We got 7 girls. Shidduch crisis. Yalla. Invite the guy home. Invite the guy home. They go back, they find Moshe Rabbeinu, they invite him to the house, and the rest is history. And then we have the story of Moshe Rabbeinu by the burning bush, and Hashem says, you're the guy, you go save the Jewish people. Moshe Rabbeinu, I don't know how you do this, but Rashi tells us, 7 days he's arguing with God. Right? I don't know how you argue with Hashem, but 7 days, finally he says, okay. That's all we know about Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, the whole thing about Moshe being the king of Africa, next time, Melina, I'll try and bring in the book, I'll show it to you, or it's highly recommended getting the book, Let My Nation Go. How come that's not in the Torah? That's pretty cool, no? How come that's not in the Torah? How come it doesn't tell us? If I told you we're looking for a leader for the Jewish people, we need a new chief rabbi. Right? Chief rabbi is great, I'm just saying. You're looking for a new leader. What qualities would you say? When they were looking after Rabbi Sachs for a new chief rabbi, what would you say are the qualities we need of a new chief rabbi? What would you say? Leadership. Do we know if Moshe Rabbeinu is a good leader? No. What else? I would have thought he needs to be a good speaker. Is Moshe Rabbeinu a good speaker?
No.
Speech impediment. Right? What else? He has to be a people's person. Moshe Rabbeinu over here, I don't know if he's such a people's person. First story we see about him, he kills the guy. Second story, Rasha! Right? Like, I don't know. Right? Why does God pick Moshe Rabbeinu? Why do we not know more about Moshe Rabbeinu? Our rabbis tell us it's very simple. What has to happen? When Hashem is looking for a leader, there's one character trait. And if he has that, that's the most important thing. What's the one character trait that we see about Moshe Rabbeinu? That's 1,000,000% true. And when the Torah testifies about him, it says, after the story that we mentioned about Isha Kushidat Shelakach, right? What does it say? Hashem gets upset at Miriam, gives her tzarat, and it says, Moshe Vaish Moshe Anav Mikol Adam. Moshe is the most humble man who ever lived. That's the one testimony. So definitely there's anava, but that's not what we see at this stage. What do we see about Moshe Rabbeinu? Vayigdal Hanar. Whenever I tell bar mitzvah kids, what does it mean to be a gadol or bat mitzvah? What does it mean to be a gadol? Vayetze elecha vayar b'sivlotam. He goes out to his brothers and he sees and he feels their pain. When Hashem's looking for a leader, what's the most important? He understands where they're coming from. He feels their pain. He's literally in the lap of luxury. He's living it up. He's in the palace and he says, no. If my brothers are suffering, I'm going to go help them. I guess it's about 2 years ago. They said to me, can you come speak for the kosher outlet? I had never been to the kosher outlet before. And I said, well, if I'm going to speak, who am I speaking to and what am I speaking about? And they said, basically, there's a few people from the government that they're redoing that whole area of kosher outlet. We want you to come and tell them how important the kosher outlet is. Right? And everything's cost price when it comes to kosher food, this, that, whatever it is. And they said, you're going to have a bunch of rabbis and a bunch of, Jewish people. You're not speaking to them. You're speaking to the goyim of the council. That's your target audience. Right? And as I looked around the room, who was involved in the kosher outlet? The 2-3 main people involved in the kosher outlet were wealthy people. They didn't need it. They're not shopping in the kosher outlet. They can afford kosher kingdom prices or whatever it is. But they understood that there's people out there that can't afford, and therefore they went through the headache. Running a business is, running a kosher outlet, it's a headache, right? They said, we're going to go out there. I don't know if there's anybody here whose husbands are involved or they're involved, but it blew me away that it wasn't, all right, we're suffering. We know that we can't afford to pay our bills, and therefore we need to do something about it. It was a bunch of wealthy people that weren't suffering and can't afford to pay their bills. They said, we need to help the people that are struggling. That's a Moshe Rabbeinu. That's someone who says, I'm going to put myself in their shoes. Right? There's a story with the Chafetz Chaim. One time he needed to help this poor family. And it was freezing cold, dead of winter. He goes to this wealthy guy's house. Guy opens his door and says, Chafetz Chaim, please come in. He says, no, I need to speak to you. He said, please come in. No, I need to speak to you. This woman, she's suffering and she doesn't have food to give her children and they have no wood for their house and they're freezing. Rabbi, come in. And he won't move. And he goes on and on and on. And the rabbi says, I need this much money from you. He says, okay, no problem, Rabbi, come in. They come in, he gives them a hot drink. He says, freezing. Why couldn't you just come in? He says, if I would have told you about it, how this woman's suffering as we sat by the fireplace having a nice tea, you wouldn't have given the same amount of money. You felt her pain for 2 minutes. She doesn't have coats, she doesn't have shoes for her kids. You had to feel the pain. Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't a good speaker. when it came time to teaching Torah, Hashem made a miracle that it came out. I have a colleague in Los Angeles, one of, if not the most popular speaker on Torah anytime, Rabbi Ari Ben Shushan. You wouldn't know it from watching his videos, but he has a mega stutter. But when it comes to teaching Torah, not once. Hashem just makes it, the Torah flows. Right? Unbelievable. Moshe Rabbeinu has a speech impediment, I don't know if it was a stutter or a lisp or whatever, came to teaching Torah, Hashem made a miracle, it happened. The Mefarshim are perplexed. It says that when Hashem gave the Torah by Har Sinai, everybody was healed. The blind could see, the lame could walk. How come Hashem didn't cure Moshe's speech impediment? They didn't want you to think Moshe was a good speaker, that's why everybody followed him. It wasn't about that. Why does Hashem choose Moshe Rabbeinu? Because he cares. He cares about his Jewish brother who's being beaten by the Egyptian. He cares when he sees two Jews fighting and they're suffering. And he says, I'm going to do my best to try and help the situation. These random innocent girls that he never saw before in his life, they're being bullied. I'm going to help these girls. When Hashem is looking for leadership, what is the number one character trait? When Hashem is looking for who's going to lead my people, who am I going to help be the greatest person of all time? Somebody who feels the pain of others. Someone who says, I'm going to put myself in their shoes. And not just me and not just my family. Right? The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says, Hillel, who was also known to be very humble. What does Hillel say? Im en ani li mi li. If I don't take care of myself, ain't nobody going to take care of me. I need to take care of myself. I need to make things happen. I can't rely on anybody. I got to do what I got to do. Ukshani la'atzmi mani. And if I just worry about myself, what am I? Statement number one, I gotta worry about myself. Statement number two, if you just worry about self, you're nobody, you're nothing. What are you? Which one is it? Is it you need to take care of yourself? Or is it, no, you can't just be narcissistic and self-centered and egotistical. Which one is it? This is a rabbi called Rav Shimon Shkap. He says, beautiful. He says, when I say ani, right, you have a single girl, and she says, I need to babysit so I can make some money. I need to get a job. I need a break. When she's thinking about herself, who's she thinking about? Me, myself, and I. Then you have somebody who gets married, right? When you say, I need to go shopping, when you think I need to go shopping, who are you having in mind you're going shopping for? Myself, my husband, my kids. You've expanded your I. You have the rabbi of a shul, and he says, I need to do X. Who's his ani? It's not just him, his wife, and his kids, it's the community. And then every once in a while you have some people their ani is not just them, it's not just their family, it's not just their community, it's Klal Yisrael. And maybe even the whole world. Right? Says Rav Shimon Shkab, what's Hillel saying? Im en ani li, mili. If I don't worry about myself, nobody's going to take care of it. Uksha'ani la'atzmi. But if my ani is only atzmi, is only me, myself, and I, ma'ani. What am I? What does that mean? We need to expand our ani. Right? My rabbi, I was just within Israel last week, Rabbi Berkowitz. He said to us, if there's something only you can do, or only you're willing to do, that's your responsibility. When Rabbi Farhi calls me up, he says, come to London, let's start this chazak thing. And I was like, me in London, Markesh. Right? I said, no one else is going to do it. He says, if we don't do it, no one's going to do it. And I have the words of my rabbi echoing in my ears. Who is your ani? Are you just worried about you, your family, your community, or Klal Yisrael? And if they need you in London, you got to go to London. Right? A bunch of years ago, I went to Miami, and I put an offer on a house, and I met with all the rabbis, and I applied to the schools, and I told them we're moving to Miami, we're starting a branch of Chazak in Miami. Right? The offer didn't work out, which was bad, because now it would have been like 6 times the price. Everyone moved to Miami. Right? But Hashem wanted us here. Right? And then Rabbi Farhi got this opportunity in Manhattan, and we thought about it, we went through it, and we said, that's more important for Klal Yisrael, you go there. And I told my kids, right, Uncle Shlomo is going to move to Manhattan, and we're going to stay here. They're like, but we wanted to go to Miami. I'm like, we're soldiers in Hashem's army. And the soldier goes wherever he's needed the most. We're needed over here. Right? Because my rabbi taught us, who is your ani? Your ani needs to be not just you, and not just your family, and not Klal Yisrael. And you go whatever. Hashem says, that's Moshe Rabbeinu. Why am I picking Moshe? What is the most important thing? Put yourself in someone else's shoes and say, how can I help someone else? How can I give this to someone else? We don't have time properly to do it justice. But at the end of the parasha, Moshe and Aharon come to Paro. They say, let the people go. Paro says, you have too much free time. You're thinking about, now, what's going to happen? You need to go find your own bricks. Quota stays the same. You need to find your own bricks. And what does the pasuk say? That people aren't able to fill the quota. So what happens? Teven en nitan la'avadecha uvanim omru lanu asu v'nei avadecha makim chatat amecha. Right? V'yomer nipa'im atem al ken atem omrim lecha lezvcha elokenu v'ata lechu v'du teven yitnu lachem v'tochen lebenim titnu v'yitru. Here's the pasuk. V'yitru shotrei bnei Yisrael otam bera'ah. And the officers of the Jews see them in bed. Le'emor lo tigrum levenim davar yom biyomo. Right? Don't reduce your bricks each day, quota of that day. V'yifku et Moshe v'Aaron, and they got upset at Moshe v'Aaron. And the pasuk says, what happened? They have the officers. And Rashi explains over here, I saw Ramat Salman brings down, it says, Vayaku shotrei b'nei Yisrael. It simply means that they hit, the officers of the Jews hit the Jews because they didn't fill their quota. Rashi explains, no. Similar system to the Nazis. The Egyptians didn't deal with every single Jew bricklayer. Who did they deal with? The same way the Nazis in Machshman made capos, made officers. Right? We were just in Poland. You walk in, and on the room in the barracks, on the room on the side, there was a small little room. That's where the capos. They were Jewish. The Jewish capo and the Jewish women had it much worse than the men. The Jewish capos, the women were known to be horrendous. Right? Not our discussion for now. There were Jews that were in charge of all the other Jews. You need to make sure they fill their quota. It says the Jewish officers, they saw that the Jews didn't fill their quota. And if you read the pasuk quickly, it sounds like they beat the Jews. You didn't fill your quota, you need to get beaten to make sure you fulfill your quota. You'll learn it's not worth not fulfilling your job. Rashi says, no. Who got hit? The shotrim, the officers of the Jews, they're the ones who got hit. Who didn't fill their quota? Sorry, I can't tell you. If you don't tell me, I'm going to beat you instead of beating the person who didn't fill their quota. I made you the manager. You're not doing a good job as a manager. I'm going to beat you. I'm not telling you. The officers, the capos of the Jews, they're the ones who got beaten. They said, we'll take the hit. What ended up happening to these capos? Anybody know what ended up happening to these capos? To these Jewish officers? The first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says, Moshe kibel Torah Sinai. Moshe gets the Torah from Sinai, Misra to Yoshua, gives it to Yoshua. Who does Yoshua give it to? The Shotrim. Right? Yoshua Shotrim, Shotrim Nevi'im. Before the prophets, before Shmuel Navi and Natan Navi and Shmuel Navi, before all the Nevi'im, who gets it? The Shotrim. Moshe kibel Torah Sinai, Misra to Yoshua, Yoshua Shotrim, Shotrim. Who are the Shotrim? The Shotrim are these officers. Excuse me, not the Shotrim, the Zkenim. Moshe kibel Torah Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim Yoshua, Yoshua Zkenim. No, it says Zkenim. Sorry, no, Zkenim. Sorry, right? Moshe kibel Torah Mitzrayim, Yoshua the Zkenim. Who are the Zkenim? Who are the elders? These are the Shotrim. Our rabbis tell us what happened. I don't know if they were clever. I don't know if they learned a lot of Torah, but they became the continuation of Torah. Moshe, Yoshua, Zkenim before the prophets. For the Nevi'im and the Zekenim. The Zekenim are the Shotrim. Why? You take the hit for someone else. You feel the pain of someone else. Hashem says, I'm going to imbue you with the ultimate Torah. I'm going to make sure that you're the one who understands, who lives, who knows Torah the most. I would have thought, who's the Zekenim, the elders? Who's the one that get to live long? Who's the ones that know a lot of Torah? The people who put the most effort in and study the most Torah and were the biggest geniuses? No. You take the hit, you feel the pain. Hashem says, I'm going to open your mind that you become the person who just understands everything. I'm going to give you the reward. I'm going to help you. I'm going to make sure it's you. Why? Because you felt the pain of someone else. When Hashem is looking for leadership, what is true leadership? Moshe Rabbeinu, king of Africa. It's a cool story. It's not in the Torah, because that doesn't show us why God chose Moshe. The only stories we have in the Torah of why God chose Moshe is because he felt the pain of others. He went out there, he saved his brother. He went out there, he saved the daughters of Yitro. You feel the pain of others, you care for others, you think of others. That's leadership. And many of us, you think, to be an amazing tzaddiket, you have to be brilliant. No. You just need to care about someone else. Feel the pain of someone else. Help someone else out. Going through a tough time, reach out to them. Help them. Just do it. Hashem says, that's my leader. That's the person I'm going to make sure that she's taken care of, that her and her family, and if she's amazing, I'm going to make sure her kids, that's the ultimate reward. Yishai, Amram, their kids are going to be amazing. That's the best thing we could possibly ask for. That our kids have that zuchut, that our kids have that amazing quality. So B'ezrat Hashem will make sure that we learn from Moshe Rabbeinu, we feel the pain of others. We put ourselves in their shoes, whether they're flats or heels, right? We care. We put ourselves and we say, how can I help this person? And especially if you're the one who's not in that pain. You're not the one who suffered. Many organizations were started because I know what it's like to not have fertility, and therefore I'm going to start something for infertility. I know what it's like to have a special needs kid, so I'm going to start something for special. That's amazing. But if you can help somebody when you didn't even go through it, that's the ultimate. You say, these people can't afford to buy their groceries, I'm good. But I see other people suffering, I'm going to do a kosher aleh. I'm going to make sure I start a gemach for this thing, for that thing, because I see this person. I'm going to make sure this person's suffering with mental health and postpartum, or whatever it might be. I'm going to go out there and do something. Hashem says, you feel the pain of others. That's my leader. That's my daughter. That's the one I'm going to make sure that she has everything, and that her and her children have the ultimate zuchut. Thank you very much.
Thank you.